I actually don't object to the Israelis targeting the Hamas leadership in Doha. My objection is they did it from the air. The belief here in the United States, a very widespread belief, is the Israelis just simply don't care about civilians. They'll kill as many people as they need to kill if there's one bad guy that's among the dead. And to fly, whether it was a plane or a drone, it looks like it was a drone, across a hostile territory. If it was a plane, this is even worse, because you're violating airspace to go all the way across the Arabian Peninsula, to get to Doha, to bomb a civilian target. If the Israelis are as good as we all believe that they are, then you send in a team, a specialized team, to do your dirty work. You don't risk killing civilians. The United States is going to have to answer to this now, because the Israelis announced just after the attack that they had informed the United States in advance. And the United States apparently did nothing to warn the Qataris that this was happening. So somebody's going to have to answer very hard questions here. Like, why do the Israelis get to play with one set of rules and everybody else has to play by another set of rules?
Jonathan, I'll let you respond, and also answer the question on whether you think America should be seen as a loser here and how it impacts Qatari-US relations or Arab Gulf nations in the US.
I actually think that, we've spoken a little bit about Qatar, but Qatar is a small country with tremendous, fantastical wealth that have, I think, credit to them, understood their strategic weakness, size, and population size and location, and they found a very smart way to work their way out of it and to ensure their strategic interests without having sizable, hard military capabilities. And they rely on soft power, and they have bought soft power around the world very successfully. And I encounter this almost everywhere I go. I see Qatari money, whether it's big news outlets, whether it's people that are simply bought and paid for by the Qataris, including very senior people that we see in the media, institutions, think tanks, schools, universities. And I think credit to them for finding a way of hedging themselves. And part of that was also that they invited the US to have their air base there, and they thought that that would give them immunity and protection. What I think has happened here, I find it difficult to imagine that Israel would penetrate Qatari airspace in an area that is heavily, heavily protected by serious and sophisticated US assets. And my assessment is that this didn't happen not only without coordination, but this happened with US approval. And I read everything happening here as not a mistake, but really as something intentional by the president, who was telling the Qataris that, listen, buddy, you may think that you own me. You may think that if you give me a Boeing, or if we may be talking about doing a real estate deal, and if my friends and family are doing real estate deals, maybe you think that you own the US president and that you have leverage over me. Guess what? That isn't the foot that the shoe is on. And I say which foot the shoe is on, and it's this one. And if you don't shape up, you, Qatar, and stop housing terrorists and actually do something useful, as in make your proteges, Hamas, stop this godforsaken war, hand over the hostages, and let's move on in Gaza, then I'm not happy with you, Qatar. And if I'm not happy, I will allow things to happen to you that you thought that you were safe from. So I think this looks much more intentional than unintentional. This isn't a slip.
Sorry to interrupt, but why target the peace negotiators, Jonathan? I want to get your thoughts on the target of the strike. Like, how can
Mario, Hamas terrorists, there's not a peace negotiating bone in any of those Hamas terrorists. These are terrorists that spent their entire life working for the jihadi cause of the genocide of the Jewish people and the Israeli state. These are the people. Khalil al-Khaya, Khalid Mashal, and all of the other terrorists that were there. These are people that have done jihad their entire adult life. They were raised to martyrdom. They were raised to fight Israel,
But
to
then if
kill
Qatar,
Israeli civilians.
but if
Yeah.
Qatar stopped their mediating peace negotiations, then how else could communication be facilitated? That's my biggest concern.
So
if we
very
both agree we want the war to end, obviously with the release
Yeah.
of hostages, whatever middle ground they agree on, how can they communicate to reach that middle ground?
very easy, and let's be clear, the Hamas terrorists in Gaza didn't facilitate anything. They were, according to the information I have, actually in the way. And the Qataris were, as far as I understand, not being useful and not applying pressure on Hamas to get the deal done and to accept Trump's proposal to get the job done. Now, if you are concerned, I think you will be delighted to hear that there's another country that has significant influence over Hamas. It's closer to Gaza than anything else, and that is Egypt. And that's another venue that exists. It's actually a parallel venue that has been existing and has been used over the entire 2 years. And there's been kind of a competition between the Egyptian channel or track and the Qatari track. And the Qatari track was given a lot of slack and a lot of presidential support. And maybe now the president is saying, you guys are not delivering. And he's a guy who wants people to deliver for him. And if they get good stuff from him, he wants them to deliver according to the goals that he has as the president, who wants to end this war. He's been applying a lot of pressure on Israel to wrap it up, to finish the war and get the hostages back and move on with start rebuilding Gaza and creating a better future. That's his vision. And I think this is him showing frustration with the Qataris. And if we're concerned about negotiations, that's all fine. The Egyptians are there and they have good channels with the Hamas terrorists as well. And we're able to communicate through them.
John, on that theory, do you think that this could pressure Hamas to accept a peace deal after what they saw? If the negotiators in Egypt see what happened with the negotiators in Doha, they'd be like, all right, we need to reach some sort of agreement because our life is on the line. So it could end up, doing the opposite of what I expect would happen. Is that it could actually, what I'm an optimist, so maybe speed up the peace process.
Yeah, to tell you the truth, I'm mystified as to why Hamas has not laid down its weapons and declared defeat. It makes zero sense at all to continue this fight. There is no fight. It's one-sided. The Israelis are going to win. Hamas is going to lose. More people are going to die if they don't come to some sort of an agreement or just lay down their weapons and walk away. On the one hand, I want to make one thing very, very clear. I think that what has happened to civilians in Gaza is absolutely unforgivable. With that said, I would say to Hamas, what did you think the Israelis were going to do on October the 7th? How did you think they were going to respond? We used to say this to Al-Qaeda fighters that we would capture in Afghanistan and Pakistan. What did you think our reaction to 9/11 would be? You can't be surprised that we came after you to try to kill you. Well, I would say the same thing in Gaza. I think it's unforgivable what has happened to the civilian population. But I lay most of this on Hamas. And here we are all this time later. We're coming on 2 years later. And they still are trying to fight. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't understand it either. What's your theory? Why do you think they're still doing that? I don't know what weapons they still have left. Assad has fallen. Hezbollah's barely trying to survive. Iran just recovering after the war there. And now we have the officials in Qatar being struck. Not Iran, where the other leader was, what was his name?
Ismail Haniyeh.
Haniyeh. You've got the leaders in Qatar, a US ally that was struck by Israel. What's left for Hamas to fight for? That's what I'm trying to understand as well. How would you answer this?
Unless they hate Israel more than they love life itself, I don't understand why they would continue to fight. You would think that they would want to negotiate some sort of benefit, as small as it might be. Something. There was a piece in the I think it was in the Jerusalem Post a month or so ago, where there was this idea that was making the rounds in Jerusalem that Israel would continue to maintain control over Gaza, but the government of Saudi Arabia would administer it, and the Saudis would build a a water treatment plant, and the Saudis would build an electrical grid or what have you. And people were saying, oh, the Israelis are floating this idea just to see what public reaction is going to be. And then the Israelis said, no. The government said, we never asked the Saudis to consider coming in and developing Gaza. That's not part of the long-term plan. So then what do the Gazans want? If they don't want the Saudis, or they don't want some sort of rebuilding, they're not going to get rebuilding from the Israelis. So what do they want? Fighting is not going to help.
Hamas, latest statement by Hamas is that they're ready to, and they've said this before, release all hostages in exchange for a clear announcement of an end to the war and the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, which Israel wants for Hamas to disarm, and Hamas not accepting to disarm. I think this is the sticking point. Hamas still wants some sort of control or influence in Gaza.
Yeah, Hamas is not in a position to make demands. It's just as simple as that.
Jonathan,
the only thing that they have in terms of leverage, sadly, I agree on everything that you said, John, and I'll just add my perspective on it. Hamas doesn't care. Hamas doesn't care about Palestinians. Hamas doesn't care about civilians. They don't care about if people are suffering. These are jihadists who really believe, not like fakely believe, but they really believe that their mission and calling in life is to achieve or die trying as martyrs, jihad and victory against the Jews. This is what they were brought up.
I think now it's just survival. But I think, do you think that they still believe that? Considering where they're at now, or is it just trying to survive?
Many of them do, and I think that the more rational of them perhaps are challenging